Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure as always. Thank you.
A death in China from H3N8 bird flu. What is this? And is there a level of threat and potential spread here?
I mean, it's always concerning when someone dies of a flu, and we're always on the lookout for the next pandemic strain, which will probably come from a bird flu. This particular strain, H3N8, is a subtype of influenza A that is endemic in birds, horses, and dogs. In the modern era, it's only infected 3 people, but one of those people has died, so like a one-third fatality rate. So we have to keep an eye on it, but it's way too early to be concerned about this because for it to become a pandemic strain of any kind has to show sustained human to human transmission, which has not happened yet.
Are we getting information and full disclosure from Chinese authorities on this?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I would assume so, but what do I know? That's a political question. So far, we know that someone got it, and they likely got it from accessing wild birds or poultry. This person is known to have, birds in their lives, so that makes sense. That's how these things are usually work. And the epidemiological investigation suggests that the other people in her life have not been infected yet. And that's good news. It probably means no human-human transmission. But to answer your question, I have no idea if there's transparency in communication, but I have no reason to think there isn't.
That story came out, yesterday. Today, Canadian wildlife and public health experts say that they're, warning of potentially devastating pandemic if the avian flu tears through the poultry flock and mutates to spread efficiently between humans. We've talked a lot about avian flu. We've had it here in Manitoba. Are all avian flus the same, or is it much like COVID-19 in the fact that there are different strains of it?
There are different versions. An avian flu is simply a flu that infects birds. There's H3N8, there's H5N1. We're particularly concerned about H5N1 because that keeps popping up in the human experience. And in the modern era, it's infected about 240 people that we know of. 56% have died. That's an enormously high fatality rate. So there's a lot of concern that if H5N1 finds sustained transmission between humans, we're looking at a serious pandemic again. Even right now, it's infecting enough birds that dogs have been known to get infected by eating a wild animal. And once it's transmitting amongst dogs, then there's risk it'll get to humans through another route as well. So, of course, a lot of concern. I would not be panicked about this. Let the scientists do their work. When the time is right, we'll let you know if it's time to panic. The good news is we can make vaccines for these things. And with new manufacturing processes, we can get them out quickly.
Last week, there was a case in Canada of a pet dog, adding to other confirmed cases in skunks, foxes, mink, and other mammals since the start of last year. Is that the H5N1 strain that we're talking about?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So I've advised people stay away from wild birds. Don't associate with them if you don't need to. Stay away from dead birds. Keep your dog away from eating dead wild birds, just to be on the safe side. There's no need to add to the burdens right now.
With Raywat Deonandan from the University of Ottawa, Richard and Julie with you on 680 CJOB. How are we doing on the COVID front?
Oh, back to that question again, huh? COVID is not gone. We pretend that it's gone, but it's not gone. The good news is the fatality rate has come down, but the number of deaths is still high-ish, higher than I'd like. More people die of COVID this season than died of the flu during the flu season. So it's still serious, and I recommend that people still take precautions to avoid getting infected. Having said that, it's not the same disease that it was in 2020. Society doesn't need to stop. We can still go about our daily business. But I encourage everyone to get vaccinated to the maximum and even wear a mask in public indoor spaces if you don't know who's about, and continue to use rapid testing to your best ability. So we're not done yet. But the good news is the Americans have okayed a $5 billion bill to finance the next round of mucosal vaccines, which should put an end to this pandemic once and for all.
I'm interested whether or not we have that herd immunity, or is that something that we just still kind of talk about, but it really doesn't happen? What's your sense on that?
I don't think it's possible with this disease because the reinfection possibility is so high and the contagiousness is so high as well, which is why the mucosal vaccine is so important because it can actually prevent infection if we get a good one. And that should dampen the transmission to such a large extent that we don't need to think about this again.
So what is a mucosal vaccine? Is that something you're squirting up your nose? For
Yeah,
lack of better,
essentially. So imagine that you are running a nightclub and you have troublemakers causing a fight in the nightclub. It's easier to prevent the troublemakers from getting in the first place than it is to evict them once they're inside. So a mucosal vaccine works like preventing the virus from getting in the first place. So it elicits an immune reaction in your mucous membranes, like your nose and your throat. And if that happens, then it never gets in the first place, and we're fine. So imagine an inhaled vaccine is more easily delivered. People who are afraid of needles don't have to be afraid of this. And it's more protective against transmission. A win across the board.
and how often would you have to do something like that?
That's a good question. I don't know. It looks like
Right.
it'll probably be a two-dose regimen, maybe even starting with a regular intramuscular jab, then a boost with an intranasal vaccine, as is being done in some countries. But it's still too early to know that.
Fascinating, and let's hope that H3N8 doesn't become, something that we have to talk about on a regular basis. But always good when these things pop up in the news to have you on and be that reassuring voice on the other end of the line. You reassured my colleague enough that he was able to switch to COVID-19 questions. So thanks as always for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure as always. Thank you.
Raywat Deonandan.